In this video, we're going to show you how to take apart the Designer One machine in order to get to the button, the circuit board for the buttons, to repair the buttons. And here's some of the tools that I use. The most important is a Torx screwdriver, 2mm, and a 4mm. And I also have a very short one because that board is in a tight area, so that's what I'm going to use to get to the board, so I don't have to take all the cables off, because when you open this, there's a lot of ribbon cables inside there, and they're very easy to pull off, but they're really easy to put back on. And you'll see, once we get into it, I'll show you more on that. But what you also need to look at, you need to look at the service manual on how to disassemble these, and it shows you schematics. So that is page 13. And I'll point out here that before you can take off the front part, you have to first take off the back part. And the only thing tricky about that is to get all of the screws out. If you don't get the bottom screws out, it's not going to come apart. And that is I believe it's page 12. That is page 12 in the service manual. And it tells you everywhere the screws are. And most of them are a 2mm screw. You have to be able to get those out. I think there's a couple of screws that are 4mm. Before we go any further with the machine, I'm going to point out a couple of things here. Make sure when you touch this machine, this time and every time, even when you sit down to sew on it, touch something metal so that you ground yourself and get all the static electricity out of your body. Sorry, I got the sniffles this morning. Our allergy season has started. If you sit down and touch that machine and there's static in your body, you're probably going to destroy the LCD screen. You're going to blow it. So make sure that you always ground yourself. And I do it by touching a metal cabinet that's sitting on the ground. I'm in a room that has tile floors, but I wear socks, and static builds up in my socks. So I am constantly, every time I'm in this sewing room, I'm constantly touching something metal to discharge the static. You can do it if you have a lamp that has a metal base. Just touch that metal base every 15, 20, 30 minutes to an hour, and that will prevent this from happening. Especially if you are on a carpeted floor or a rug, static will build up. So make sure you do that to ground yourself first. Okay, before you get started, go ahead and take your power plug for the machine and have it handy nearby so that you can test these buttons before you put it all back together to make sure that they work. So we're going to take out screws. There's 4 at the top, 2mm. There's 1 in the bottom corner. Let me see if I can get that for you. 1 right here, and there's 1 right here. So let's get those out first, and that's with I believe a 2mm. Yep, it's a 2mm. And what I do every time I take these machines apart, because these screws are so easy to lose, what I do is put down a giant puppy pad. Let me show you. And you can write on these. So what I have done, I take a magic marker and I write on there. I've got a back, and then I've written, it's not in the screen, but you can't see it. But I've got a back and a front and then an underneath, and that way my screws go exactly where I know they should go. And anything else, I've got little boxes drawn on the side, and as I go I can write down what those are. So I'm going to take the screws out now. Okay, I got 6 screws out of the back side of the machine, and now I'm going to remove the screws underneath the cover, and there's going to be 2 for the front and there's going to be 2 for the back. And what I like to do, I have taken a magic marker and I colored the one I just took out. I colored red and I marked with the magic marker in red where that goes. So there's those. I'm going to put those under my spot that I labeled under. Now while you're down here, you might as well go ahead and take off the remove the screws for the front side, because we're going to do it anyway. So that's down. If you flip it over, flip it to the front side, the back is showing. There's a screw in each left hand corner, and there is a screw toward the middle, directly down from where I removed the screw at the top, and that's going to release the front and the back unit for us. Okay, with all the screws out, we're ready to disassemble the unit. So I'm going to set it up on its bottom. And by the way, take your accessory tray out so it's easier to work with. You don't need that, it'll just be in the way. So what I'm going to do now is start taking the machine apart. I'm going to do that by pulling on the top, and you'll hear it come apart, but there's a trick to it. The very bottom piece, I'm going to see if I can get to that. Hold on. The bottom cover has to come off before the bigger piece of the back cover. Well, there it came without it. That's the first. Okay, so set that piece to the side, out of the way. We don't need it, but we've got to get the bottom piece out, and you sort of have to manhandle it to do that. Make sure and there's a screw in there, so I didn't get it out. Okay, what you have to do is just work with that and try to get it out of that loop. It's in a lip that goes into the front piece. So I've got this is just a burnishing tool that I've had for years and years and years that I use when I don't want to scratch something. So if you have to pull it gently. This is plastic and it will break, but I've unseated it. It just sort of sits in a little lip. So if you're gonna have to use a little bit of force, excuse me, for this. Okay, I have wedged it off, and it's still attached to a cable over here. Let me show you that cable. Okay, so I've got that whole piece off now, and you really do have to use some strength to get it off. Just do it carefully. And what you see here, there is a cable attached to this piece. That's okay. Just swing that piece out of the way and we're good to go. Now we have to take the front part off. Okay, in order to get the front part off, you have to do a couple of things. You have to remove the hand wheel. So I've removed it, just pulls straight off. So do that and put that to the side over there. Another thing you have to do is push the lid, that front lid up, and flip the bobbin winder down. If you got thread on the unit, go ahead and take it off, because it's just going to be in the way too. And we don't need it on there for this. Okay, put that back down. Now the turn the wheel, and right now the wheel's off, but there are little pins that you can turn. So put your thread hook in about the middle of it. And now what you're going to do is unseat it from the bottom. It's just sitting, again, it's just sitting in a little trough. Oh, by the way, take the little pin off of your binding, the little white pin. Just pull it straight out and take that off too, and put it to the side where you can't lose it. So now you can pull the machine. Uh-oh, I forgot. I forget this every time. There are 2 screws in the back that have to come off. That's what's holding it together. 2 screws. There's one over here and there's one over here. So I'm going to take those off, and I believe that takes a torque, a number size 4. Nope. 2.5. Yep, it's a 2.5 screw. And I'm going to mark those in red also, so I know where those go back. And I've opened these up many, many times, so I know what to do and what not to do so that I don't hurt the machine. But these 2 screws are extremely important. So take them off and put them over here to the side with the rest of your materials. Then take the second one off. At this point, the front cover's ready to really just fall off. So if it starts to fall, just grab it. Okay, now I've got those screws off. So now the front, I'm going to have to keep turning this so you can see it. The front is just ready to come off now. See, it just, if it catches somewhere, take a look and see what it's doing. You don't want to hurt anything. So what's going to happen now, you've got the front sort of dangling there, held on by just the cables to the motherboard. So here's what you got. And you're going to try not to pull any of these cables out, but if they come out, they're easy to put back on, so don't worry too much about it. So what we need to do now is take off the board, the circuit board for the buttons. I'm going to show you where this is located. Right here is the circuit board for the buttons. And what we have to do is take off the circuit board, and underneath it are the buttons. Now, if you could get in there with a long number 2 Torx, that's fine. If it's too tight, you use a smaller or a shorter number 2. So I'm just going to take that screw off and take the little fitting with it, and you can see that that little fitting goes on a certain way. There's a little slit in the side that fits the little fitting for the buttons. So now you got to get to the board. So what you want to do, if your fingers can get in there and just pull straight up on that, comes off pretty easily. And you, if it's attached, you can leave it attached. That's fine. But I like to. Okay, come on. It's just a plug-in kind of thing. So now we are ready to repair this board. So let's say, let's line it up so you can understand what it's doing. This is what okay, here's the buttons. That's what the buttons look like on the front. And they match up. See the little notch in the side? That little notch fits right over that piece. And let's say that the reverse button is not working. What has happened is that the contacts either wore out or they got too dirty or whatever. What I always do is take some alcohol and clean the contacts first, and usually that doesn't really make any difference. The problem is that the contacts have worn down. So what we have to do basically is put new contacts in. So here's my Buttonworx panel, and what you want to do, let's say the top button was worn out right there. What you want to do is find one to the closest size to that that doesn't go. You don't want it to hit any of the other metal pieces. So you would try to get one that just covers that. And see, that one would be too small. I would use that one right there, the big one. But there are 3 that are different kinds of buttons, and there's nothing on here really that fits that. So what I do, I find the one that's the closest to the size, and that would be the elongated one. That's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to cut that off of the card of buttons, and you can cut these, doesn't matter. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to cut this in half, and I'm going to put each half on each side and make sure that it doesn't come in contact with any other metal parts. So I've cut that in half, and I'm going to take the paper off. It's got a sticky surface. And what you're going to do is take that, let me do this so you can see it better. So now you've got it cut out. So what you want to do is place it as close as you possibly can, and I am going to have to cut some of the clear part off so that it doesn't touch anything else. So now you put it sticky side down. Well, it's still, it's not, yeah, that's good. I'm going to trim some off the bottom. I don't like it. I think it's a little bit too big. So now it's ready. Sticky side down. And I'm going to put it right over that button. And it's not touching anything else. And you're going to do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit. You see what I did there? I just covered that metal part. I'm going to trim the next one down just a little bit and take off the sticky paper. Okay. Okay. Again, my fingers are big, so I like to use these little forceps. And I'm going to lay it right on top. That looks pretty good. It's not touching anything else metal. So I think we're good to go. Just make sure you trim it down. I think I even got this one a little bit big. I'm going to take that off and trim it just a little bit. I don't like it. But you want enough sticky on it so that it doesn't fall off. And it's okay if the sticky part, the clear sticky part, is touching something else, but you can't have the black part touching something else. See how it's almost on that solder joint? That's okay because there's no can't talk this morning, no conductive material touching it. So now what you want to do is line your buttons back up on it. And we're going to put it back in. Well, actually, we're not going to put it back in. We're going to leave it just like this and test it just like this to make sure that when we put it back together that it works. So let's go ahead and put that back in. Okay. Go ahead and put your buttons back in just like they were when you took them out. See the little notch? Put them in, and then take your board gently and put the board back in. But first, it's easier to plug it in while it's still out. So just match it up. Make sure you match it up. You don't want to bend the pins. So, and then put it back in position. Pretty easy to do, huh? Push it back right where it was. Push it in just a little bit so it matches. And then this is the hardest part. Get the little button back. So the open place on that goes, like I told you, this is the hardest part. Put that back in. I'm going to put the screw in there first because it's not cooperating. Okay, the board is back in place where it's supposed to be. I'm going to turn the machine around and I'm going to first check to make sure over here that there are no loose wires that should be plugged in. Sometimes they're just short ribbon cables, and if you give them any room at all, they will come unplugged. Okay, so I'm trying to get the cables out of my way so I can put, and there's one there that wants to get caught. So, as you can see, I'm not being really gentle with it. This is just a little bit tricky because underneath the arm of the machine there's a ribbon cable, and that ribbon cable is on there really with double-sided tape to hold it in place, and sometimes they come loose just from getting old. So there it is. I'm going to, before I put the back cover on, because it has so many screws, I don't do this again. So what I'm going to do is now plug it in and see if all the buttons work. And again, it was the reverse button. That seems to be the one on everybody's machine. But what you want to do here is just make sure everything's working before you put all those screws back in. So let's do a test. Let's I'm plugged back in. So now let's turn it on and make sure it comes up, because it's really easy to pull the cables out. And I have done it so many times. So it's coming up and it says raise the bobbin winder. It wants everything in its place before you go any further. So it came up, it looks good. And let's see now if the buttons work. Hold on. Okay. The button, we put it back together, we've tested it, and none of the buttons work. What that means is that there is a cable loose somewhere. So I'm going to take the front back off. You have to put the bobbin winder down. We'll take that back off and see what happened to the cable. Okay, just as I suspected, when I took the front off, I pulled some buttons out, and one of them was the cable that makes the buttons work. That's what powers that circuit board. So all you do is put them back in, and they come out so easily, so it's not a big deal. It's easy to fix. So there's one, and they will only fit in one place. The little one goes in the little connector, and the other one goes in that in the next connector. I can't talk this morning. I'm taking allergy meds. So now everything looks plugged in. It's usually, for me, it's usually the motherboard that I unplug, and then you just have to go back in and fix it. So let's try it again. Let's see if the buttons work for me this time. And that's a very common thing to happen, so it's not a big deal. Just fit it as best you can. Make sure all the cables are out of the way, and sort of guide it as best you can back in there. But gently, gently, gently. And you have to fiddle with it a little bit. So, we've done that. Let's test the buttons again. Okay. I've plugged it back in. Popped everything into its position. So let's test these buttons again. Turn the power on. Okay, it's coming up the way it should. Put the bobbin winder up so it can keep going. Now let's test the buttons again. The fix button. The buttons are not lighting up. That tells me I've got to go back and find the little light that powers that. So I'm going to turn it off and go back in. And it's usually not this complex, just when you're recording it. Okay, this is a learning exercise. I tell you, when you take these apart, when you go to all the trouble to take these apart, go ahead and while you've got it open, take a paintbrush and get some of the filth out, the dirt and the fluff and threads, and it'll just keep it nice and clean. And at this point, if you've got canned air, go ahead and spray it through this part. It's okay to spray it. It's going to go straight through instead of staying in the machine. So it's okay, and there is quite a bit of, and there's a pin. Interesting the things you find in here. So anyway, we put the buttons back in, and twice they did not work. So when I went back in, there was two cables had actually pulled out. So I put those back in and tried it again, and it did not work. So I went back and looked at those cables, and the cables had actually, I didn't push them in far enough, so there was not a good connection. So I went back in and I pushed them in good into their slot, and now it works great. So just got to get it back together now, and without hurting any of the cables. You have to put that winding foot back down so it'll fit through the hole. Okay, there's a ribbon cable, about a 1-inch ribbon cable underneath that arm that it keeps getting stuck on, so you just sort of have to use your other hand to press into that to clear. Okay, we're putting our front piece back onto the machine. Just try to get it into all the little nooks and crannies that it wants to fit into, and it's going to be a dirty job. You're going to have grease everywhere. Just keep a rag close by. So what you want to do is hear a pop when these pieces get back in their tracks. Okay. That sounds pretty good. Okay. Then, at this point, we're going to start reassembling it. Okay, we've got the front part back on. We've tested it. Everything's working good. So now we have to put the back piece on. And this is what's going to hold everything together. You put it on and you snap it good. You make sure that it snaps. Hear that pop? That's a good pop. So now on the back side is the one that holds the handle on. So we are going to put the handle so that it fits in that slot. Well, before that we have to put these very important screws back in. So take those screws that you put aside, and we're going to put those back in, two at the top. That's what attaches the front, and that's what really makes it stable. So you want those in there good. So gotta get the right. Here we go. This is a 2.5-inch Buttonworx. So we're going to put the first one in. Don't forget those, because if you do, you're going to have to open it back up and put these in. This is just what makes the whole thing nice and steady. It keeps it from, actually if these weren't here you probably could not use the handle. You couldn't carry it by the handle, because this is what sort of stabilizes that. Those are in there good and tight. And I put the handle back in where that goes on that back piece. So now you're just gonna line it up and push it all back together until it pops. That looks pretty good once you get those screws in there. But everywhere that there is a joint, go ahead and push it together as much as you can. And now what we're going to do is go grab all the screws that you took out of the back. And I've got, oh gosh, it looks like 8 screws. 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 screws that have to go back in. So everywhere that you took them out, you have to put them back in with your number 2. So I like to start at the top and go down. Just put them in just part way to begin with, and then once everything fits and we know it fits, we'll come back and screw them in all the way. And turn the handle up because there's 2 screws under the handle. There's one down here. Let's see if I'm gonna go. There's one here. And sorry about that. Okay, there's one here, and there's another one right below it. Okay, the front and back cover are back together. We're going to turn it on its back side. We're just going to flip it straight back and put the screws from the underneath, and I think that's with a, let me see what's this, that is with a 2.5 Torx. So you get one, you got one up here in the corner, and these are longer screws, so, and don't use a power drill to do this because you will ruin it. Trust me, I know. And there's one in the corner right below that one. And then there are 2 in the middle that I marked with the magic marker, so I know where they go. Because once you start doing this, everything's sort of plug and play. As long as you can take this thing apart and put it back together, you can do just about anything. You know, I don't repair the boards. I do soldering, but I'd rather not. It's messy and it's really easy to mess it up. So now we've got everything put back together. And we've even taken our rag and alcohol and cleaned everything. So let's set it back up. What do we need here? Well, we need to put the handle back on. So let's get our handle. Here's my handle, and it fits right over the pins, and you'll see how it lines up. Just give it just a snug and test it. And we also need to put the little head back on, and that little head points up. So the only thing that we need to do now is put our accessory tray back in, or your embroidery unit, whichever one it is. And by the way, that little trap door in the back right there that opens, I keep that closed when I'm not using the embroidery unit. I think it's just a good habit to get into so nothing can get into that. So now let's turn it back on and let's see if everything still works. Hear that? That's good. All the buttons work. And you have fixed your problem for, what, $7. But it takes, if it's the first time you've done this, it's probably going to take 1 or 2 hours. I can do it now in about 30 to 45 minutes. So that's it. Get you some Buttonworx and keep your machine going. Thanks.